Hi everyone, my name's Ryan H. Lewis, and I was inspired by my video last week on Webpack version 5 to really look at ways that Webpack can be used in the cloud. And so for today's video, we're gonna look at the three best ways, the three ways that, I kind of consider the most reasonable ways to run Webpack in AWS. So the first way to run Webpack in AWS is by running it on AWS Code Build. So if Code Build is something that you haven't really heard of or you don't really understand, it is one of AWS's developer tools, and usually it's used in conjunction with Code Pipeline. Code Pipeline is a kind of an all-purpose continuous integration service. I'll call them CI services from now on. And Code Pipeline basically fulfills the same thing that things like Circle CI or Travis CI or even kind of Jenkins do in other types of places. It's a AWS first native service in there, and Code Build is a piece that you can use in your pipeline. So really, I wanted to start by talking about when you would want to use Code Build, right? So if you need a full CI solution, basically from a commit into your Git repository all the way to production or even testing or verify or really anything, then AWS Code Pipeline is a great option. Especially if you are all in on AWS, if all of your deployment stuff is in AWS, although you can use other tools like Circle CI, Code Pipeline is kind of a native thing. You can keep all of your infrastructure as code, and it's just it has all the same permissions models with IAM and everything. So if you are all in on AWS, I would say give Code Pipeline a look. And if you're using Code Pipeline, you will be wanting to run your Webpack on Code Build. So I have my computer and I'm going to show you what this looks like. So here is a pipeline that I've pre-created with a CloudFormation template. And before I get too far, all of the code, I'll have a link in the description, but all of the code for this video is in Webpack on AWS in my GitHub. So I'll have a link to that. So if you want to recreate anything in here, all of the code is going to be here for you. So here I have my pipeline that I created, and if we click into it, you'll see it only has two sections. It's just got a source, that's where it pulls from the GitHub repository, and it's got just a dummy deploy step. It's just got a manual approval. Code Build isn't built into here yet, and this source is kind of what you have to start with a pipeline. So I'm going to show you how to get Webpack running on here. So you'll add a stage. Typically you call this a build stage. I'll just call it build here. And then in this, you create this action group. And so we'll call this Webpack build. I might not be able to put spaces there. Here's where you do the action provider. There are a lot of different action providers in Code Pipeline, so you can do a lot of things with it. For our purposes, we want Code Build because we want to run Webpack on Code Build. So the input artifacts is basically how you move things through the pipeline. This is a source artifact. This is some kind of blob that has the source code from GitHub. We are going to create a new Code Build project. I'll call this Webpack build. And for the image information, so this is going to be the operating system. So when you think about Code Build, it's sort of like a mini container, or it's a mini EC2 instance where you're actually running stuff. So you can define which operating system you want, and then the runtime, the image that you want. So in this case, we'll just use Amazon Linux too. And let's see. I do have a service role. This was also created by CloudFormation. It's important with Code Build when you're running really anything in a code pipeline. You need to have access to the S3 folder that is used to pass the artifacts along. So if you don't have access to that, your Code Build won't be able to get the source code. I've pre-created a build spec file. Let me show you what that looks like. So this build spec file is essentially what is going to be running on code build. And so this is the part where you will be saying Webpack, essentially. One thing that's important is the version of Node. In my last video, I talked about how Webpack 5 now requires Node version 10. So you need to have 10 or higher. In this case, I have 12 just because I used this a while ago, but 14 is the current LTS version. This is where it installs the dependencies. It uses a CI command, which is used in NPM, which is an install, but it's like a specialized install specifically for CI servers. And here, this npm run build is where this is where Webpack is running. So let me show you what that looks like. In our package JSON, in our build script, basically we're just saying Webpack. So in this case, I could say Webpack here, but npm run build is just a nicer way to say it. And then it builds everything. With code build, you can cache things. And so again, sorry to keep repeating, if you saw my last video, you saw that the Webpack has a new file system cache that works really well. And so by caching the entire node modules folder here in code build, it ensures that the Webpack cache file system cache also gets cached. So subsequent code builds of this code build should be incredibly fast, much faster than it is normally. Cool. So we have the build spec. We just put that at the root of the project, and code build will automatically grab it. We'll continue back to code pipeline. Okay, so now we got our code build project, and we can basically go ahead and say that this step is done. Now we've got our build stage. We've got our code build. Webpack is running on that. If I click save, then basically I just need to say release change. It'll pull the code from GitHub, and it will run our code build on AWS. And this might take a little bit of time, so we won't stick around for it. But using AWS code build is a great way to run Webpack on AWS. All right, the second way to run Webpack on AWS is with a fairly new service that I'm actually kind of excited about. I'm really excited about it. I won't lie. It's called AWS Amplify. And essentially it's like the simplest way that you can run serverless applications on AWS, which is really cool. So you'd want to use AWS Amplify when you have a serverless or a statically rendered like a Gatsby or Jekyll site. And you want to be able to run it kind of from repo to deployment. So this is kind of a full continuous integration, continuous deployment system, and it's made very easy. But if your application isn't serverless or statically rendered, then Amplify is not going to be the thing for you. However, my project is a little bit statically rendered. There is an index file that I have that does show up. So although this isn't a serverless project, we can try this out and see what it looks like. So looking at AWS Amplify now, the dashboard, I'll connect my app. So I have my repo in GitHub, and I will authorize it and confirm my password. Okay, so I've authorized GitHub to connect to AWS Amplify. I'll select my repo, Webpack on AWS. This is one that you can see. It's got the branch set in there. You can pick different branches. I'll go to next. This is so easy. This is so freaking easy. It's already built in to use this npm run build command. This is one of the reasons that I didn't just call Webpack explicitly in the build spec YAML, because npm run build is a common npm script that a lot of things are built to use and set it up as a default automatically. So by saying npm run build, it's just kind of universally recognized. So I don't have to edit this at all, which is pretty cool. Let's look anything in advanced settings. Build images, none of that matters. So we'll just go to next, save and deploy. That was like 3 or 4 clicks. And what we're going to see is the the application is just going to basically pull everything from GitHub, and then it's going to deploy it out to the server. So Amplify is finished building and deploying the application. It happened really quickly. Sorry, I had to skip the video ahead. But I wanted to show you a couple things here. The build step, you can look in here. Amplify looks at front end and back end as completely separate build steps. So it kind of puts this in the front end side. But you can see here, when we run our npm run build, it's running Webpack, and you can see all of the nice Webpack output warning me about my package size, unfortunately. So you can see here that Webpack is building, and it's running in AWS with Amplify. And if the serverless and static nature of Amplify suits your application, I would highly suggest using it. And there's Hamster Ball Fantasy League. That was super easy. All right, the third way of running Webpack on AWS is running it on AWS Lambda. Running it just as a Lambda function. The reason I bring this up, the reason that I think about this as a both valid and a useful way of running Webpack is because back when I was at Expedia, we actually built out a serverless application, and we had to essentially, to get things really fast, we had to do multiple builds of our client-side application for the different brands we were supporting. And so we ran Webpack in a Lambda function and pulled DynamoDB data to create all of this different code. And I'll be honest, it worked so well. It worked really well, and I'm pretty proud of that technique. So if you need serverless Webpack builds and you have some weird Webpack configuration, like I had to build custom loaders and plugins, which I had never done before. That was a very interesting experience. If you have some very impressive or weird requirements for your application and for your build, then running it on a Lambda might be perfect for you. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to create a function here. I'll author it from scratch. I'll call it Webpack build. Again, here's where we have the node runtime. The good thing is that no matter which node runtime you pick for Lambda, you are good for Webpack 5 because node 10 is the lowest one that you can select. So I'll just select 12 here. All of the defaults should be fine, and then I can create it. And then I'll show you the Lambda I have written. This is super duper simple. So it just requires Webpack. It pulls in the Webpack config, which is conveniently a JavaScript file, and it module exports the entire configuration object, which is awesome. Webpack, when you run the Webpack in JavaScript, which you may have never done because you probably use it on the command line a lot, the first argument is the configuration object. So I pull it in, I require it from this Webpack config.js. It's the same one that's running when I say npm run build. I pass that in, and then you have to pass in a callback for it to actually run Webpack then. So basically, I'm not doing anything with the output here, but it's just saying, sorry, let me scratch that. Webpack is actually saving it locally. So I'm not actually doing anything with the Webpack output, but what I am doing is I'm catching any errors, and then if the build succeeds, I'm sending that back. Since we're inside an async function, I can return a promise to kind of do that back and forth. So very simple, but you're going to be running Webpack on a Lambda, which is pretty cool. So here's our Lambda, and the first thing we need to do is get the code on here. So I will zip it up. You have to zip up your code. Typically, I'm using something like the serverless framework here to deploy my Lambda apps. I just didn't really feel the need to do that for this demo application. So I have my code here, and I'm going to upload it. I actually had to cut a few dependencies here because the package zip was too large. Lambda has an upload limit. Let me save that. So Lambda has an upload limit of 50 megabytes. And so that's one of the tough things when you are building things in Lambda. You kind of have to put all of your dependencies into the Lambda so it will be able to do the build correctly. And sometimes when you do that, you start getting up against this 50 megabyte limit, which unfortunately is a hard limit. You can't grow it at all. One thing I didn't try, or I haven't tried before, is actually running npm install on a Lambda. There's probably a way you can do it with the layers, which actually lets you ship executables with it. I just haven't actually done that before. So that would help you get kind of past this zip upload limit. All right, so it finished uploading. We do need to modify a few things. First of all, we need to update our handler. It's expecting to find a handler function in the index file, which is not what we're doing. We have a Lambda file and a build export function for that. So we'll update that. And then one of the other key things about Lambda is when you're running Webpack locally on your computer, you likely have like 4 or 8 gigabytes and I don't know how many cores in your laptop. So Webpack's going to run pretty efficiently, right? So with a Lambda by default, it has 128 megabytes of memory and 1 virtual CPU, which is not a lot at all. So a lot of times this is not enough to run Webpack in an amount of time where it becomes feasible. So you can bump up the memory here to like something around 1 gig, and then go ahead and bump up the timeout as well to 30 seconds, just so you don't run into any of these issues. When I had it at this, Webpack completed in about 20 seconds. And just another note, remember that when you increase the memory, it also increases the virtual CPUs that this Lambda function can use when executing. So, this should be more than enough. So let's go ahead and test it. I need to create a test event here and I'll run it. And basically it should just be outputting with the Webpack build succeeded. Again, I'm not doing anything with this. Normally you would want to take the S3 or take the file that's output and move it to an S3 bucket so it can actually be stored. And that's actually when I was building a loader plugin combo for Webpack at my previous job. That's actually what I did. It exported it to S3. That was a part of I believe the plugin part. And here we go. The Webpack build succeeded. It hit that resolve function. This is the stats object that was output with just a bunch of gobbledygook. And you can see that it took 24 seconds to run, even with 1 gig of memory. I'm thinking the more that you give it, the faster it will run. I haven't played around too much with this, and I don't remember what we did previously at Expedia, but this is Webpack running on Lambda, which is pretty cool. All right, those were the best 3 ways to run Webpack on AWS. I do have a bonus here, and that's that you can also just run Webpack on EC2. EC2 gives you a virtual server with an operating system, and you can install whatever software you want on there, and basically you can do whatever you want. And so you can absolutely run Webpack on EC2. Would you want to? Probably not. I mean, if you needed a long-running, like a build server that was able to run Webpack, and you had multiple teams or multiple applications that needed that Webpack to run, potentially you could set that up on an EC2 instance and have it just ready to go whenever. But honestly, I don't really think that's a great option. The reason you might want to do it is because when you have a large application, sometimes Lambdas don't cut it because they do have a maximum timeout, and their resources are a little restricted and kind of not very specific. Like you can't really tell exactly what's going on. And you've got that dependency limit that I was talking to you about, where everything has to be less than 50 megabytes zipped. So I don't know that I would use that EC2 solution, but you can do it if you need to run Webpack on EC2. All right, so those were the best 3 ways to run Webpack on AWS plus a bonus. Just to recap them. So the first way you can run Webpack on AWS is with Code Build. You'll probably be using it with Code Pipeline, and that's really good if you want a full CI solution. The second way is with AWS Amplify, and that's really good if you have a serverless or a static rendered site and you want to, again, kind of use a full CI solution. You saw how easy it was. It's crazy easy, and it, deployed it. Even though I skipped the video ahead, it took like a minute, which is amazing, to completely get everything provisioned the first time. And then the third way is to run it on Lambda, writing your own code. This is a good option if you need a very flexible build. It's a little off the beaten path. Code Build might work better for you in that way, but I like being able to play around with things in JavaScript and kind of get my my build running specifically how I want to. The bonus was running on EC2. My suggestion is to not bother with that if you don't need to. So thanks so much for watching this video. Please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see some more. I'll see you next week.